I'm Eric Anderson. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, show us the money, the game plan to replace the Q and fund a new multi-purpose stadium in San Diego. Plus, the promise to Charger fans.
California ranks in the top 10 worldwide for its renewable and clean tech energy. I'm Peggy Pico with what it means for local jobs and where we can improve. Then, how childhood trauma is linked to serious medical conditions like diabetes. Former San Diego City Attorney Casey Gwinn talks about his new book, Cheering for the Children, Creating Pathways to Hope for Children Exposed to Trauma.
This is not rural. This is urban.
We have to start making real decisions as to where we want to house our citizens, both our current citizens and future citizens, because no is not a plan.
A race for land, changing the definition of a rural lifestyle. The debate over leapfrog developments in San Diego County. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Dwayne Brown is off tonight. We have a price tag on a game plan to keep the Chargers in San Diego. The group charged with creating a funding mechanism for the new Charger Stadium announced their idea requires no special taxes and no vote of the public. KPBS reporter Tom Fudge joins me to talk about today's announcement by the Citizen Stadium Advisory Group. Tom, how does the advisory group propose that we pay for this new stadium?
Well, the advisory group came up with a plan which they consider to be fair to all parties. Here's the way it works. It would require the Chargers and the NFL to come up with $500 million to pay for a new Chargers stadium. The city and the county of San Diego would be required to come up with $467 million, and some of that money comes from the planned sale of land that is currently in the Qualcomm Stadium site. The chairman of the task force, the advisory group on a new Charger stadium, is Adam Day, and he says that this plan is an opportunity for the Chargers to stay in San Diego. Here's what he had to say.
It's a very fair plan for the team. Just like any negotiation, everyone needs to give a little bit. But this is a clear path forward to stay in San Diego. It can be financed. It can meet all of the stress tests that were laid out by various individuals. And it's a workable plan that can keep them here in town. If they want to stay in town, they have a plan that provides them an opportunity to do so.
Okay, so does it mean that the funding plan will not have to get the approval of voters?
Well, that's what Adam Day told us. He said none of the funding mechanisms that they're proposing in this plan will require a vote of the people to be approved. But now, I put that to Mayor Kevin Faulkner, and he said that he remains committed to a public vote on any stadium plan that involves public tax dollars. Here's what Mayor Faulkner had to say.
I've committed to a public vote. I think it's important. And I've said very clearly that if it's a good deal and it's a good plan and it makes sense for taxpayers, San Diegans will support it, just like they did for Petco Park.
So that brings the question, what happens now?
Well, what happens now is this plan has to be put to the mayor's office and to the Chargers. The members of the advisory task force said that this was simply the beginning of a conversation, and the Chargers only said today that they have not seen the plan but will consider it. Remember, the reason we're talking about this, Eric, is because the Chargers have threatened to leave San Diego to move to a new stadium that would be built in the L.A. suburb of Carson.
KPBS editor Tom Fudge. Thanks, Tom. Tomorrow on Midday Edition, the head of the Citizens Stadium Advisory Group explains what's next for their proposed stadium financing plan. That's at noon on KPBS Radio. A hotly contested development plan for Del Mar Heights Road won approval from the San Diego City Council back in February. We're talking about the One Paseo project, and it was back on the agenda today. KPBS reporter Megan Burks was downtown and has this report.
Today's City Council meeting moved from council chambers to here, Golden Hall, to accommodate what was expected to be a long, heated clash over one paseo. But an early motion in the meeting took that heat right out of the debate. City Council voted to postpone the vote until Thursday. Now, on the table is whether to rescind an earlier approval of the 24-acre development on Del Mar Heights Road in Carmel Valley, or to let voters decide. Residents on both sides of the issue came out in force today with signs and T-shirts. They initially were exasperated with the decision to delay, but most now say that either way, the community will have its say.
You know, this is the wrong way to go about compromise, but if that gets us to where we want to, everybody wants to get where Carmel Valley wants to get, where the applicant wants to get, then maybe it's not such a bad thing after all.
They gathered signatures saying that they wanted to put this to a citywide vote. That's what they sold to the people who signed their names to the petition. They said, this should go to a citywide vote. This will affect your community. This is a way for you to weigh in on smart growth. Well, then give the people the chance.
Now, legal teams for the developer, for community groups, and for the shopping center directly across the street from this would-be development are supposed to meet in the coming days. If they can come to a compromise that addresses some of the concerns, including relieving traffic in the area, most city council members say that they will vote to rescind. Now, that would sort of push the project into a do-over. It would have to go back through the city for approval. It would have to go back through the community groups for approval. And that ensures that this is not just going to come up 3 days from now, but it will likely be in the spotlight a year or 2 years from now. Megan Burks, KPBS News.
Military leaders are investigating what went wrong after a Marine helicopter from Camp Pendleton crashed in Hawaii. One person on board was killed. The Osprey chopper was in the middle of a training exercise yesterday when it attempted a hard landing on Oahu. 22 people were on board the craft. They were assigned to the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit, which left San Diego last week for a 7-month deployment. All San Diego County Sheriff's deputies have a new tool to help save lives. It's called naloxone, and it's a medication to treat overdose victims. It was used in a trial program last year, and 11 lives were saved. Now, all county patrol stations and substations will have deputies carry that medication. California ranked in the top 10 worldwide for renewable energy production and renewable energy used, according to a new global report. Peggy Pico finds out what that means for local jobs and the region's economy.
The nonpartisan think tank Next 10's Green Innovation Index tracks California's progress in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, clean tech innovations, energy policies, and economies. Joining me with what's going right and what can be done to improve in our region is my guest, Jason Anderson, President and CEO of Clean San Diego. And Jason, so California ranks second in the world in the top 50 nations behind France for emitting the least amount of carbon. So what kind of carbon are we talking about? These carbon emissions, where do they come from?
Primarily energy generation, but also electric vehicle usage and other sources. I think it's worth noting that the reason that France ranks so low is because they have a significant amount of nuclear energy within their country.
So our carbon emissions are our cars and actually energy that we're using to
Yes.
Fuel our houses and things like that. So when it comes to our region, where are we actually seeing our most renewable energy sources?
So primarily it's solar generation. San Diego is home to the second most amount of solar rooftop solar installations in the country. But we also have a significant amount of solar that's being generated out in Imperial County, some wind, and also some geothermal as well.
And how much does the clean energy or clean tech industry actually contribute here regionally to our economy?
Quite significant amount. We've got about almost a little under 40,000 employees that are working in the space in San Diego, a little over 800 companies that are working in the space. So it is a significant contributor to our local economy and is actually poised to be a continual growth industry for San Diego as well.
And when you say growth industry, are we talking specific jobs? Are we talking venture capitalist investment? Can you drill down on that?
Both. I think both in jobs and in capital investment. Probably more importantly locally is job creation.
And what kind of jobs are we talking about? Are these the kind of jobs that maybe some local San Diegans can get, or are we kind of importing them?
Well, I think it's all about local San Diego jobs. You know, some of them are in the solar industry, rooftop installers, etc., but also a lot of engineering jobs. A lot of the students that are coming out of UC San Diego, San Diego State University, and others are poised to do really well in this industry.
Now, the city of San Diego proposed a climate action plan. It's often called very ambitious. If it's adopted, how do you see our local green tech industry actually helping it come about?
Well, I hope that when it is adopted and when policies and things are put into place to help this city meet its goals, that they actually use local San Diego companies. And in doing so, that will help create jobs, will drive economic development for our region, and hopefully new companies will be created because of it.
Do you think that companies could actually sort of submit to local government to sort of say, hey, look, we can help you meet our plan this way?
For sure, and I think that's definitely already happening.
Now, California ranked in the middle of the pack on this index for creating carbon emissions on a per capita, so per person basis. So what can the average person do? Maybe somebody who's not wealthy enough to put in solar paneling on the roof. What can you do as an average citizen here to reduce greenhouse emissions?
Well, let me first say, and maybe correct you, that you don't have to be wealthy to put solar on your roof. There's a number of different programs that are available to citizens and residents to install solar that's pretty almost minimal cost. But I think the average citizen, to use that term, you know, the simple things: change out your light bulbs, keep your turn off your lights, and turn off your, you know, when you're not using your television and certain products at your home. Just be more aware of how you're consuming energy, when you're consuming energy, and make small changes to adjust those.
Were you surprised to see how well California did in this report?
I wasn't. I mean, I continually compare ourselves to other states and other countries around the world, and because of the regulations and the policies that we have at the state level, it's really created a significant marketplace here in California, and obviously that trickles down into San Diego. So I wasn't surprised at all. I'm definitely excited about it. I think it bodes well for San Diego, and I'm excited to continue to watch this industry grow.
All right, Jason Anderson, thanks so much.
Thank you.
There is a development proposal testing San Diego's plan for a growing population. You know, another 1 million people may be living in the county by the year 2050. KPBS North County editor Allison St. John takes a look at the tough choices before county supervisors.
At the same time we were buying, they were buying.
Mark and Karen Jackson bought their retirement home out in Valley Center 5 years ago. Their property is on semi-rural land, zoned for a maximum of one house every 4 acres. But Mark Jackson says a developer has plans to ask the county to change that zoning.
The accretive proposed Lilac Hills Ranch will be on the lemon grove that's just over my property line, out about 300 feet from where we are now. And that's where the start of very high-density urban development will be.
Jackson says if built, the Lilac Hills development would add more than 1,700 homes to an area zoned for about 100. The community would be the size of the city of Del Mar, a good example of what's called leapfrog development, allowing houses to spring up in rural areas where there are no existing towns or job centres. Steve Hutchison is on the Valley Center Planning Group.
The project extends on the east from over this direction, all the way across, all the way behind me, 608 acres.
Hutchison says San Diego County spent millions of dollars and more than a decade updating its general plan. It was finalized 4 years ago and was designed to preserve rural areas and help the county meet its goal of reducing greenhouse gases. It specifically prohibits leapfrog development.
If you can have an exception to that leapfrog development prohibition, basically you can put a project like we've been talking about virtually anywhere in the undeveloped county.
The decision of whether to approve the proposed Lilac Hills project here in Valley Center could set a precedent for many other developments in other semi-rural areas of San Diego County. In order to approve it, the county supervisors would have to modify principles put in place to make the future development in San Diego more sustainable.
We would really like to show you all the great plans we have, and we have a lot of images over here.
The developer, Accretive Investments, has held meetings with the community and says the proposed development is sustainable sustainable. It includes solar energy, recycled water, on-site composting and green buildings, plus walking and biking trails.
Does it translate into reality?
Matt Adams with the San Diego Building Industry Association says the county supervisors will have good reasons to make amendments to the general plan.
We have a housing shortage in San Diego County. Homes cost as much as they do now because we don't build enough of them, and we haven't for over 10 years. Sandag says we should be building 1,000 new homes every month just to keep pace with population growth. And we haven't done that in over 10 years. So we have to start making real decisions as to where we want to house our citizens, both our current citizens and future citizens, because no is not a plan.
San Diego's regional planning agency, Sandag, has just adopted a new regional growth plan that calls for more compact development to help meet the region's goal to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Both Sandag and the county are being sued for failing to meet those goals.
We've done some more work on.
But Charles Muggs Stull, Sandag's Director of Land Use and Transportation Planning, says the agency has no authority over the county's land use decisions.
What we try to do is we try to encourage, land use plans that, that focus development in already developed areas, because that's what we generally see happening. And so we try to do things to advocate for that and to encourage that, but we are not a land use authority.
Yeah, from the east, near the road here, all the way across.
Hutchison says Valley Center is ready to accept its share of new housing, and the general plan includes space for new developments near the existing town center. So why don't developers build where the general plan says they can build?
If you look at land like is behind me here, it sells for much less, maybe $20,000, $30,000 an acre, somewhere in that neighborhood. If you get into the community centers, well, everybody knows it's going to be higher density and consequently more expensive, and it could be up, over $250,000, maybe up to $500,000 an acre.
The Lilac Hills development is expected to come before the Planning Commission and then the County Board later this summer. The decisions will show whether millions of taxpayer dollars invested in years of public planning will determine the future, or will millions of dollars in private investment change those plans. Alison St. John, KPBS News.
KPBS video journalist Katie Shuloff helped put together that story. San Diego researchers are looking at ways to help kids who are exposed to sexual assault and abuse. They're seeing a link to heart disease and other serious illnesses. Peggy Pico has more on that study and how it's being used at a local camp to help kids.
The Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACE study, is an ongoing study between the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. Here with how childhood trauma results in adult physical and mental illness is the study's co-principal investigator, Dr. Vincent Folletti. The ACE study is a major part of the new book, Cheering for the Children, Creating Pathways to Hope for Children Exposed to Trauma, written by former San Diego City Attorney Casey Gwinn, founder of the National Family Justice Center and Camp Hope. Welcome to Evening Edition.
Great to be with you.
Now, Casey, I understand a young girl at the camp named Jasmine inspired the title of this book. How'd she do that?
She did a number of years ago. I had seen her at the shore of the lake when we were running camp in East San Diego County, and she was being so kind to these frogs that were hopping around and putting them in a little jar, and then she'd let them go. So that night at the campfire, I called her up in front of the whole group, and I said, I just want to honor Jasmine for her kindness to the frogs. And everybody clapped and cheered, and it was really fun. And then after the campfire, she came up to me and said, thank you. That's the first time anybody's ever cheered for me. And it had never dawned on me that kids growing up with violence and abuse and trauma don't really have a bunch of people cheering for who they are or who they can be. And that became the title of the book.
And when you're talking cheering for a child, you're not just saying, patting them on the head and saying you're awesome.
Right. We're really talking about ways that you figure out how you can invest in their lives. I say in Cheering for the Children, every child needs at least one person that passionately loves them, believes in them, cares about them, and sticks with them, and causes them to realize who they can be and what they can become.
Now, Dr. Folletti, Casey's book references your Adverse Childhood Experience, or ACE study, which reveals the startling link between childhood trauma and serious health issues like obesity, cancer, cancer, heart disease, mental illness, IV drug use, things like that. What kinds of traumas are measured in this ACE study, and how prevalent are they in the population?
We measured 10 common kinds of trauma, and they were unexpectedly common. We got into this by accident, really. Major physical abuse, contact sexual abuse, major emotional abuse, major emotional neglect, major physical neglect, and 5 categories of household dysfunction, serious household dysfunction, growing up in a home where mother's being beaten, where one of the members of your household is imprisoned, where somebody is chronically depressed or mentally ill, someone's an alcoholic or a drug user, without both biological parents.
And the prevalence was about?
Was really startling. I mean, for instance, in a clearly middle-class population, 74% had been to college, etc. 28% of the women and 16% of the men acknowledged a history of contact sexual abuse.
A large number. I understand the study showed that in these 10 categories, it didn't matter how the abuse or the trauma took place, the difference between, let's say, sexual trauma.
That too was a great surprise, that the 10 categories were essentially co-equal.
But, however, they accumulate when it comes to the links to health issues, correct?
Yes. What we did was we counted the number of categories to which people were exposed, not events or incidents, but categories. And then we measured their health status and well-being roughly a half-century later. And the way this played out a half-century later was absolutely extraordinary. For instance, a person experiencing any 6 of the categories was, at some later point in their life, 4,600% more likely to become an IV drug user than a person experiencing none of the categories. A person experiencing any 6 of the categories at some point later in their life was between 3,100 and 5,000% more likely to attempt suicide.
So it's staggering outcomes for this link. Casey, how are you using these ACE score to help kids at Camp Hope?
Well, we really made a decision. We started Camp Hope 13 years ago. We weren't really measuring anything in the kids. After I became really educated on the ACE study, engaged with Dr. Folletti, we decided to start administering ACE at Camp Hope. And last summer, we started giving the 10-question ACE score survey to our kids. Our average score was 6 for all kids at Camp Hope last summer from all over California, coming from family justice centers, domestic violence shelters, foster care systems. Our kids are those kids that have those 6 scores. And we realized not only do we have to understand what's happened to them, let them tell their story, help them understand why they have so many consequences and so much rage inside them. But then we also started using something called the hope scale to start measuring hope in their lives. So now we're measuring their trauma and we're measuring hope, and we're following it longitudinally to figure out how to change the ending for these kids.
And this is at the kid level, but we'll have to end on this, Dr. Folletti. You've said your ACE study is not being used widely by the medical community. What should an adult do if they realize that they have serious health risk and or have had childhood trauma?
Well, that's a good and a difficult question. My best thought would be to find someone whom you trust to speak with about this, to share the information. Because what we found is that being able to tell something shameful about oneself to another person and realize that you are still accepted by this person is a very powerful and beneficial tool.
All right. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but we have more information on this on our website, kpbs.org. Dr. Vincent Folletti and Casey Gwynn, thank you so much.
Thanks, Peggy.
I'm Judy Woodruff. On the next News Hour, the legacy of Head Start, 50 years after it began helping children in need. That's Monday on the PBS News Hour.
Mexican students are painting a large mural over a graffiti-blemished wall in a Tijuana community that's plagued by crime and poverty. KPBS Fronteras reporter Jean Guerrero says the students' mural contains some inspiring messages. Have a look.
Esteban Carmona Mendez smears red paint on the outer wall of an elementary school where he studied as a little kid. He was one of dozens of students creating a mural in the town of Tecolote on Tijuana's outskirts.
My friend and I are writing, "Take care of your community, because the community is ours."
The project is part of Advancing Students Forward, a nonprofit that helps disadvantaged Tijuana students get access to education. Carmona says he wants to leave a positive message for the children of his community.
If we vandalize, graffiti, and just create a disaster in our community, the environment ends up affecting little kids the most of all.
The students painted over graffiti under the direction of Mexican muralist Enrique Chu. He asked them to express themselves with positive messages and bright colors.
All together, we can change the community for a good way.
Chu is part of Mexico's long-standing tradition of muralists, such as the well-known Diego Rivera. He says murals have a history of empowering average Mexicans with a voice.
The only way we can express ourselves is doing something like this.
The director of Advancing Students Forward says she wanted to give the students an opportunity to give back to their community.
The world has many, many sad and depressing things happening, and there's such a need for art. It lifts us up and takes us to a different space.
The students plan to finish the mural sometime this summer. Jean Guerrero, KPBS News.
You can find tonight's stories. They're all on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition, if you're looking for it there. Thanks very much for joining us. We will be back here tomorrow night. Have yourself a great evening.